Go ahead and put your feet flat on the floor and tuck yourself into your chair, and let's just be still for just a moment tonight since we're starting late. May we have the joy and the courage to live the gospel in a foreign land. Amen.
Amen.
The gospel according to Matthew.
We're going to answer that question we left this morning.
We are.
It's just impossible. One more time. There you go.
Matthew borrows a great deal from Mark's gospel. Literally just takes hunks and plugs it in. And in your gospel parallels, one of the things that you'll always want to watch for is, where is it plugged in? Is it sort of in the same neighborhood that it was originally used for the Gospel of Mark? Or is it been plugged into a whole different place to serve an entirely different purpose? So the Gospel of Mark literally ends with the word gar in the Greek, which is the English word for. And so it's a preposition, it's a bridge that, and it falls off there. It's an odd place, even in Greek, for it to end in a sentence. But in English, it all comes out, and they were afraid. And that's where the curtain comes down. And I asked you last night, why is that? I wasn't expecting you to have the answers. I mean, unless you have done some research around the Gospel of Mark or, but what I'm trying to do with you is about method, is that people who may not have linguistic background, may not have historical, cultural, political background, you can learn to be detectives with the English text that you have in front of you, right? So you can see in the apparatus of your Bible that somebody added a shorter ending to that at some time, much later. And I think the reason for that is obvious. They were not satisfied with where it was. This can't be right, so let me add something in here. And then later somebody said, well, that wasn't good enough. Let's just do this, you know. But if we go by textual manuscript evidence, and if I were to ask you just your opinion, right? Don't be worried about if you're wrong or right. Let's learn to wrestle, push, and pull with the text and see what we can draw from it. Why do you think it ends like that? Mike?
I had a theory during home last night.
Cool.
I did not do any research, but I have a theory.
Yeah, that's fine.
Considering the audience, which is in Rome,
Yep.
so they aren't Palestinian,
Right?
and they weren't really familiar with, they weren't intimately familiar with what was going on, but they are intrigued by the church. They have been drawn to the church, and they hear homilies or preaching in church. They don't really know what the background of it is. So this can be kind of like a catechism that leads up to Sunday morning worship.
Interesting.
This is what we're talking about.
Right.
This is why we're saying the things we're saying.
And we took you this far,
Right.
now we open the door.
Exactly.
I like it.
I think Mark maybe that's where the story ended for him. Although I kind of struggle with that because you know he supposedly was the version of Luke to Peter,
Yeah.
as Luke was to Paul. So
Right.
surely if there was some post resurrection stories, Peter's mentioned in at least one of them.
Yeah.
He would have,
Yeah,
I'm sure,
it's
passed it
one.
along to Mark. So
Yeah.
I got to think there must not have been one.
Yeah.
Or maybe, my theory is Mark didn't want to try to convince us. He left it up to us to believe or not to believe.
That's good. See, you guys get at some pretty good stuff. You really do. I mean, some people have written books of 500-600 pages that took them all that time to say what you just said in a few sentences, Okay. So first of all, let me tell you that Tammy, please. You had a good day today, so let's just keep it going.
Okay, well, I don't know. I just feel like whenever I, say, watch a movie or read a book and it has a weird ending,
Yeah.
I'm always talking to my friends about it. And then that spreads it to that friend, and then maybe they start reading it or start watching it. So maybe it was a way of spreading around this new story. It's just a...
How many of you watch Game of Thrones? Oh, so what's happening?
But not last Sunday, so don't say anything.
Oh, okay.
Do not say a word.
Oh, it's
I was eclipse chasing, okay?
You're gonna love
It's
it.
just interesting. Yeah, you are gonna love it. So, but there you are, and that's what happens. People sit around, or we're in the bank line, or at the line at the grocery store, and somebody's like, "Oh, look at Game of Thrones on the magazine." Somebody says, "Do you watch Game of Thrones?" And it starts.
Yeah, if you can imagine back then, they were probably like, "Did you hear this story about Jesus?
Yeah.
What is this?"
What
And
happened?
everyone starts talking
Right.
about it.
Yeah. So one of my
One more,
Okay.
we touched upon this last night, but I mean, maybe he started, maybe he ran out of material, or whatever, started a volume 2, and then he got hit on the freeway or something, and
Right.
everything went
and it's
over,
gone.
but it's gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe the rest of the manuscript is missing, which
Because
for a long time is what people thought.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That the manuscript got ripped off, and I mean literally, and it's,
Yeah.
it's gone.
Because Luke had 2 volumes, so Luke had,
Yeah.
so.
Right.
I'm wondering about something else, and I'm going back to the statement that he's going before you to Galilee, which would have been the ordinary lives of the people that were his disciples before they went ahead and followed Jesus. And now Mark, this was written afterwards, so I'm wondering if this is an invitation for the communities to try and find Jesus in their community when they gather. Because there must have been some word of people who felt that they had seen Jesus, because in the other Gospels from Q there were instances of that. And so maybe this is just an invitation that he didn't want to prescribe but to leave it open that they could find Jesus in their ordinary lives when they gathered.
Right. I'm going to push the pause button right now because I'm liking all 3 of the things, and I'm not just saying that, okay? But I want to tell you something about my method while I am here with you. And that is, I want this engagement and this dialogue. It slows me down, right? And that's okay, because once I go back to Colorado, we won't be able to do this. And part of what I'm teaching you is so much more than content, right? I want you to learn to engage the text, and don't be afraid of being wrong, right? Because a lot of things that I'm saying to you tonight, especially tonight, a lot of this is my theory. It comes from all the years that I've wrestled with this and the lens I put on to interpret the next gospel, which is Matthew. And I think this is what we are called to do. So, really early on in the week, I said to you that the life of Jesus is also, in a way, metaphorically, to be your life as well, right? And maybe not always metaphorically, right? The cross invitation in the Markan Gospel is not metaphorical. It's literal. It's real. Christians are going up on crosses, right? And it wasn't that much time ago that Peter was crucified in Rome, upside down, right? And so this is a hurting and traumatized community, and challenged and so on and so forth. And it may be this. It may be that as Raymond Brown was really good about saying, nobody knows for sure why it ends here, you know? But he did talk to us about a play that circulated in Rome in the early 60s, where the curtain literally fell in mid-sentence. And the torches were lit, and people didn't know what to do. I mean, the lights went on, torches were lit, and they were all sitting there, and then they went to where they would gather for pizza and wine, whatever it was, and they would begin to talk about, no, see, all the way through the play he did this, so it just makes sense that he or she would do that. And then somebody would push back and say, well, but no. And you can imagine this in the Gospel of Mark. But the Son of Man, but the Son of Man is the suffering servant. But that doesn't make sense. And so it's an invitation to engage the story that we have so that the life of Jesus really does become our lives. And we live out. Resurrection, we can point back to the end of Matthew and Luke and John and other Gospels, right? And part of Peter that we have and so on. But in the end, right, somebody asked, it was Tony or Mike, somebody said, it was you, is this real? Is this a real story? Sooner or later, you have to encounter the person that the story is about, right? There'll be no substitute for that. Not much help there, am
No, but I'll give you an amen to that.
I? Okay. I'm sure I've ever had an amen from a thorough Italian male before.
Catholic.
Catholic, right? Yeah. So, did you want to say something?
Well, let me throw out an even different idea.
Sure.
I mean, every commentary I've read focuses on the word afraid, that the women were afraid because of this angel or this young man.
Right.
Okay, well, maybe that's not the way we should read the word afraid.
Yeah.
Maybe we should read the word afraid in reference to the people who are reading this, that they are the ones that are afraid. They're the ones that are afraid. They're the ones that are being martyred. They're the ones that are being chased down by the Romans. And so the women are silent, just like right now we the endangered community, we know this stuff.
Right.
We are going to meet Jesus. But right now, the best thing we can do is be quiet.
Yeah.
Because if we say anything, we're going to be martyred.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, isn't this great? This whole discussion is great because nobody really knows, but we're wrestling with it, and I like that. And it makes sense to me. It's too bad somebody doesn't stand up on Easter Sunday morning and read this gospel and say that. And then allow the congregation to break up into small groups and say, you got 10 minutes to wrestle with this. All right. Are you ready to switch gears? There's no blood being shed in this community. I think. So, give or take a decade, somewhere around 80 to 90, Bishop Peter and I might say 70, just because that's where we are. For a long, long time, the traditional authorship had to do with Matthew, or Levi, as he's mentioned in the Gospel. A tax collector among the 12 wrote either the Gospel or a collection of the Lord's sayings in Aramaic. Some who rejected this picture allow that something written by Matthew may have made its way into the present Gospel. Is this redundant for me to read this out loud?
No, it's good.
Would you rather take turns reading just to go around the table? Just say yes or no.
No.
Okay. The author detectable from the contents. This is Father Brown. Now, Greek
Except, I have a question. I don't understand that second line though. Some who rejected the picture of Matthew who had a collection, reject the picture, and allow that something written by Matthew may have made its way into the present
Yeah,
gospel.
like maybe Matthew wrote
Some of it,
things.
okay.
So in my picture about a proto-Matthew that comes from a certain area, that's probably what that refers to. You'll see the chart my wife made in those boxes and the arrows and,
Okay.
yeah. Father Raymond Brown says that his best guess, and he's incredible with language, a Greek speaker who knew Aramaic or Hebrew, or both, and was not an eyewitness of Jesus' ministry, drew on Mark and a collection of the sayings of the Lord, as well as on other available traditions, oral or written, probably a Jewish Christian. No. So, everybody that I read, Allison Davies, Warren Carter, Joseph Fitzmyer, just a whole bunch of people are like, we're pretty sure. There's several locations this could be, but all the ones, the Catholic ones that I read, they're like Antioch, region of Syria. That's not for sure either, but, and there's no reason to think of more than one author or any sizable additions to what he wrote. So we don't have the problem we do with Mark about an ending, like who did that or who cut it out or whatever. Now, questions on this page?
Can I just ask a factual question? Were these four writers contemporaries of each other, or were there vast differences in their ages?
So the next question.
Oh, no, or no answer.
Not you on that one.
So, the earliest time I've ever heard from Mark being written was 50, and the latest I've ever heard John 110, 115 AD. And Polly, it's really, I mean, I wished I could say to you that, boy, within 5 or 10 years, but it can't. And everybody's doing their best research. They include archaeology, they include secular historians, they gather all this stuff together and they throw the dart at the page and they do the best they can.
Can I just,
That's
back up
three.
just 1 second?
That's 3.
3? Okay, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I can save that if you want.
No.
No, but you made a comment as we were talking about the ending of Mark about the fact that they were afraid Peter had just been crucified. So I never thought about the fact that Mark could have been written, you know, in Rome after Peter was crucified. He makes no mention of that. He makes, I mean, no.
That's why Bishop Peter and I think that maybe it's not written as late as, how do you not mention that?
Yeah, how do you avoid?
You know, it's kind of like the Acts of the Apostles and the death of Paul.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be big questions in our New Testament studies that we're just going to, wow, what is going on there? Because I think that if Peter died in the city where this gospel originates, that's kind of like headline news, right? Unless for somehow that particularly is tied into the ending of their fear. If they can kill him, they can easily kill Tony and Sharon, right? Whom we know. And before they die, they might turn into him.
I just give me, thank you.
All right. So, this is about Christology and ecclesiology, the study of Christ, and the study ecclesiology is the church. I shouldn't assume that you know that. The word ecclesia, as it is in Greek, where we get ecclesiology, klesis means to call. This is really important to me. Klesis means to call, and ek, the prefix, means out of. So, people, the church are people who are called out of the world, right? I don't mean they're dead, and I don't mean but I just want you to know that that's what that word means. And in the Gospel of Matthew, I think they take that very, very seriously in what is the second largest city in the entire empire. Okay? So, we're going to come back to this, because I actually think this is a little bit out of order. I want to ask you some questions that maybe you've thought about, but now I'm thinking about the community of St. Matthew in Antioch, the second largest urban center in the entire empire. So first of all, how do you run a city of that magnitude? What does it take? Who's a manager or boss in this room? Besides you, Chris. I mean, how do you run a city that big?
Break it down into smaller units and put people in charge of them.
You do. It's hierarchical, right? It's unrelenting. There are laws, there are rules and regulations, and everything that they didn't learn themselves, I'm sure, they learned from the most efficient empire in the history of the world up to that time, right? So, if you ever look at the Roman government, draw it out from top to bottom, draw out the Roman church from top to bottom, draw out the Italian mafia from right to bottom, top to bottom. They're all the same structure. Why? Because it's efficient, it's lethal, it works, it keeps order. So all the way across over to Syria, the second largest city, is very hierarchical. And on the perimeter of it, the edge of its city is also rural. And I need you just to keep that in mind. So, real structure to this. Now, what, outside of telling the story of Jesus, what is the intentionality of the Gospels? But particularly tonight, Matthew, what does it do? I don't want to know what it means, or who wrote it, or when, but what does it do?
Gives a feeling of togetherness.
Well, it does. It builds community, right? It legitimizes things like identity. Who are we? Where did we come from, right? And it also legitimizes a way of life. That's important because, in case this hasn't occurred to you, this enormous city is not made up of Christians. We know from archaeological evidence that there was an enormous synagogue in this city. Power, money, education, prestige, standing, influence, right? And then there's also always the specter of something greater than the synagogue. It may be in Syria. But there's a Roman governor there. And there are Roman soldiers there. And there is the power and the lethal authority of Rome in this city. Big time. Second biggest city, second most taxes. All right? So, they might have had a billionaire for a governor. Who knows? So, how does the gospel form communal identity? How does it shape a lifestyle? How does it impact the surrounding culture that is not Christian? It's not rhetorical. I'm really looking for answers. Give it your best shot.
Well, it forms communal identity because it gives everybody the same story.
Bingo.
If you-
There's a common narrative.
Mhm.
Okay? We share the same story. Doris?
And it gives a lifestyle to all the teaching at the beginning of the gospel.
It does, doesn't it? So here's how we're supposed to live. All sorts of instances are going to come up with your enemies, with your family, about divorce, right? All sorts of things. What to do with your money, da 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 da. Okay? Anything else? How does it impact the surrounding culture? I'm going to let you in on a little secret now. The church at this time in Antioch is not big. It's tiny compared to the synagogue and all the other worship centers that are there. The church is not big.
Well, I don't know if this happened in Antioch, but I know for example, in Rome, the church became more influential because of many of the powerful men's wives became converts
Yep.
because of the empowerment of women in the
Yeah.
Christian church. So it filtered its way and became more influential that way. At least in Rome, I don't know if it did in Antioch or not.
Yeah, think about Syria. It's a very progressive state, I would imagine. Alright. Here's the other thing I need you to know about this community. Let's look at chapter 1. This is probably my favorite chapter in all of the Bible. I used to read it every Christmas. And people would just yell at me and say, "Oh my God, are we gonna do this again and again?" Ready? The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah became the father of Perez, Tony Perez, who played third base for the Reds, and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Tell me about Tamar.
Tamar had to play the prostitute in order to get her rights as a Jewish woman because of the fact that her father-in-law would not send his youngest son to fulfill the, I don't remember the name, but her husband died, and then the next son came and he died, and then she was supposed to wait for the last son, who basically was maybe 12 or 13. So she had to go back to her father's house and live like a widow until he was supposed to come. Well, he came of age and never appeared. And so she decided she'd get her rights. So the father-in-law would
You know
always...
what? We got it. Just one word in there about had. She had to play the part of the prostitute, but she did that well, apparently. And
I'm sorry, I got going as a storyteller
oh,
because I got a story about her.
I love you. So in verse 5, Solomon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was who was Rahab. Come on, Doris.
Okay, Rahab. Oh, yeah. Rahab
Yeah,
was
yeah.
another, I think she ran a house of ill repute.
She's a hooker. Okay, got that. Whose mother was Ruth. Obed became the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David the king, and so on and so on. David became the father of whose mother had been
The wife of Uriah.
wow.
Uriah the Hittite.
What was her name?
Bathsheba, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Loose woman? Was she a loose woman?
I don't
She was
know.
a beautiful,
I
she was a
think-
beautiful woman.
I think David was the instigator there.
Sheba.
Bathing
Sheba.
up on this
Bathsheba.
roof.
Yeah, well, take
That's
a
right.
bath outside where everybody can see, and that's okay. So,
Yep.
that's a male sexist thing. I got that. So, but here's the point. Get out all your Jewish genealogies. And 99 times out of 100, who are they not going to mention in there unless legally they have to?
Women.
They don't mention the women. And here Matthew is not just starting out with one, but no offense, but these women are not in good standing at their local Roman Catholic church, you know. They're, not only that, who's this genealogy for? Whose genealogy is this?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah. Sometime, and now Matthew has created this because he has a group into 14, and it's not accurate factually, historically, but he's theologically trying to tell us something. A great study is to go through and just look up in your Bible dictionary the little paragraphs about each one of these people. Now, do you know your family tree?
Not back that far.
No, not back that far, you know some.
So,
So everybody in your family is a person that you're proud of and good standing. No.
Yeah.
So what's rich about this? Why is this an option to read on Christmas Eve or during the Christmas cycle?
Because he's put in the dark sheet right there, he's written the names down.
I'm not sure there are any dark sheep in that list or yours. They're just human beings, just people. And Matthew was bold enough to put in, and by the way, these three women aren't Jewish. They're Gentiles.
I have a question on this. I thought in Jewish
Do you
culture,
think I'm gonna make it to chapter 2 of this
I thought that for Jewish people, the connection with the community was being mother.
Oh, Mother Diane, I mean, in so many ways, that is just true, right? Except when? Hereditary, right? If the husband dies, the money doesn't go to the wife, it goes to the oldest son. And then if there is no oldest son, then it goes to the oldest nephew related to the husband, right? So there's a lot of power, I think, and influence in Jewish familial workings. But legally, there's not. This, in some ways, is a legal document that's out of whack. You know, I mean, having three women in the genealogy listed is odd. Having them been Gentile for the lineage of the Messiah is even stranger. And having them be women who are of
High enough stand.
yeah. So, it's interesting that he includes them because I think it reflects what's going on in their church. Gentiles, we know from this time, as believe it or not, they have population things in Syria way before this. And Gentiles are coming into the church, and when you turn to chapter 2 now, if you would, we get another story right away about outsiders and a significant role, right, about Jesus. What is this? You know this story in chapter 2, don't you?
Story of the Magi.
Yeah, so the Magi, right? What are Magi?
Wise men,
Wise men?
mystics,
Myst-
scholars,
mystics?
mystics.
Astrologers?
What happened to three kings?
I don't know. Rubber cigars and all that stuff? I don't know. What happened to three kings?
There's a religion called, starting with A, I can't pronounce it, weren't they followers of that?
I don't know the A.
Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism.
So where?
Yes, that's an A.
With the great god?
Okay.
Where? You ain't getting out of here alive tonight. The point is, these are probably polytheists who come from outside the circle of Judaism, right? They don't belong. And here's the twisted thing about this. They know. They've been traveling, some people have told me, for up to 3 years to get here, right? And you know how the story is. They're like, we're here for the Messiah. Well, the people who have the book, right? They have the sacred writings. They're blind to this. They're like, what's going on? And of course, Herod doesn't know, right? Because he's an Idumean Jew, so we might cut him a little slack maybe, but he has to consult with people. But here, Jesus is being born in the midst. Nobody knows but these
Outsiders.
way outsiders, you know? It's like, I gave permission for this woman to come to Mass on Sunday and set up her palm reading chart right outside the door. Yeah, Bishop Peter's going to have a field day with that, I'm sure. But do you understand what I'm saying here? So this is theological work that is going on here. People ask me all the time, is this a true story? You're darn right. Every word of it is true. Is it scientifically factual? I have no idea. But I think Matthew is trying to make a point because it's reflective of what's happening in the life of this church. And there's more that's happening. By the time I'm done with you tonight, you're going to say, you need to go back to Berkeley and stay there. So this is where I go. Because it's through this lens that I look through, that this gospel begins to make sense to me, historically, culturally, politically. And it can be colored that I'm really trying hard to work with a bunch of millennials, right? So watch. First and foremost, Matthew is a counter-narrative. Let's all say that together.
Counter-narrative.
Really wanted the whole thing.
What is a counter-narrative?
Let's do it.
First and foremost, Matthew is a counter-narrative.
Okay? What's a counter-narrative, Sharon?
An additional narrative,
Could be.
an opposite narrative.
There you go. An opposite narrative. One that's pushing back to the narrative of the culture, right? One that says to the culture's story, their center, right? Which is Roman Empire, which is huge Jewish tradition, synagogue, history, robes, incense, books, parades, right? This little community is pushing back and saying, we have a counter-narrative, and it starts right away with the genealogy. We've got women in the genealogy of the Messiah. Oh, I can't even imagine. And then, these women, right? Wow. And then the Magi. It's like, could you just kick the synagogue any harder right from the get-go? And that's what happens. It is both intentionally a formational document and a work of resistance for a small community committed to Jesus. That's how the ECC began. I know. I was here. Peter was waiting on tables, trying to support the church, remember? In a pizza place. Doing I don't know how many weddings every weekend, trying to make ends meet. And one day I said to him, you need to stop all that. You need to let me have the pulpit for 3 weeks and go and do a stewardship campaign because the people here want a pastor. And somebody just needs to tell Catholics who don't give like Protestants that you need to pony up to the bar and pay some money so we can have a shepherd. I'm not tooting my own horn here, I'm not, but I'm just saying this is your beginnings also. Interesting, isn't it? This is the gospel of
Tax collector.
where are you?
Me.
St. Matthew's. The gospel shapes their identity and lifestyle as an alternative community to the rest of society. Questions? I know that's dangerous in this room.
What year do you, when do you think this was written?
I mean, my head is so full of stuff around this that I can tell you that if it's before the fall of the temple, then a trajectory is going to take me down this way. And if it's after that, which I think it is, then we're going to see why things are like that. 75, 80, 85. I think it's before the Council of Jamnia, when Christians are expelled from the synagogue in 90 AD. But I don't know that either, but that's my best guess. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, that's...
Well, I just finished reading the Christ fair amount of time talking about the Jewish war and the hundreds, thousands of women who were raped. Nobody ever really talks about, I mean, they talk about the death of the men.
Yeah.
But women were raped. And this is a total guess on my part, hypothesis, but the lineage in Judaism was through men for a very long time. But as you and I all know, in the Judaism that exists today, your lineage genetically is carried through the mother.
Right.
And I think my guess, and I have no way of verifying this,
Right.
I haven't talked to a rabbi about this, but my guess is that it was because of the Jewish war and the rape of all these Jewish women that the community came to the conclusion that the only way we can guarantee your genetic heritage is through the mother, because there are a very high probability that the father of this child was not a Jewish man.
And hence the doctrine of the virginity of Mary. And I don't want to go there right now. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it no, makes sense
yeah.
to me. You know, it's, yeah. Joseph's in this story,
let
though.
me just, on
Yeah.
the virgin birth thing,
Mhm.
it has to strike everyone as ironic, to say the least, that Jesus's humanity is given to him through his mother, according to the teaching of the church. But from a biological point of view in the first century, she had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that this baby is a human baby.
No DNA from the women in the first century. That's, anyway. Sometimes it's just difficult being a man and facing up to all our mistakes. When I use the word the center, I'm using it politically, I'm using it religiously, I'm using it as a metaphor. The gospel exposes the world that is at the center in Antioch. I'm talking about Rome. I'm talking about Judaism as one of the established religions in Antioch. But it's the one that casts the biggest shadow on this community that is small and still mostly Jewish Christians, right? With some Gentiles starting to come in. Can I just ask you, in the 21st century, who could we compare Gentiles coming into a Jewish Christian church to? Who would we liken that to?
Us?
Okay, us meaning independent Catholicism. No,
Non-Jewish.
non-Jewish. Gentiles, okay. But today, the church is Gentile. Right? We're not Jewish, so if you're not Jewish, you're Gentile.
What about all the Protestants that have come into our little Catholic
The
church?
Protestants that have come into St. Matthew's, right? Who, for years, were the clerical leaders of this Catholic community. Isn't that interesting? That's why you guys are so weird.
Speak for
You
yourself.
guys?
After the Nazarenes.
What else could you think of? People who are coming into the church today that might take you back a little bit and go, what are they doing?
Some of the,
I'd say gays and lesbians.
The gays and lesbians? We had 2 churches in the ECC. It wasn't the ECC, and we got a phone call from a pastor in New Mexico that said, we'd kind of like to talk to you about joining. And that's what Peter said to me. I said, good news. I said, that's great. He said, here's other news. I said, what's that? He goes, he's gay and openly married. And I was like, well, there you go. Okay. Transgendered people, right? Republicans. So I don't know if you're awake, Sharon, that's all. for laughing. Okay. So, people in the center, people in the margins. These are the issues. What is the center's take on power? What's their position on power?
They own it.
They own it, right?
Want to keep
Control.
it.
Control, they want to keep it.
They've had it for thousands of years.
They've had it for a long time. And they're lethal. They're not afraid to go to war. It's not their first choice, but if they have to do it, they are all in. Right? What are the people on the margins? What's their idea about power?
It belongs to other people.
It belongs to other people. But in terms of the Matthean community, how do they understand and live out power?
Equality.
Equality is a big piece, isn't it? There are different roles. Don't get me wrong, but power is something else. Okay? Well, I'll keep pushing it then. What does structure look like for people at the center? It's hierarchical, isn't it? You know who's in charge and who's on the top. When they put their feet down on the table,
Better jump.
stuff's gonna roll downhill. You're gonna move and do what you're told or else. What about the early Christian church in Antioch? What is their structure like, do you think?
It's more grassroots,
It's more grassroots?
but they probably started their own structure outside of the main structure.
They might have gotten their structure from their former religion, which is in the big synagogue across the street. They might understand it differently. The nuances might be a little different. But I think the structure is pretty Jewish at this stage. Who's on top? In churches in the margin? Who's the top?
Early on, the apostles.
I haven't seen that word yet in Mark or Matthew. That's
Founding
interesting. Founding pastor might be. There might be an apostle, one of the 12, to be more specific, that is associated with Antioch, right? Maybe.
Or someone that knew the.
Or somebody new, one of the 12, and somebody who studied under them. When we get to the fourth gospel, the Maverick gospel, we will talk about a Johannine school of leaders and authors and writers and teachers instead of one person. So, who to follow? Who people on the margins follow? This is the easy one. If you don't get this, you have to go back.
Jesus.
Jesus. Okay. So, the people in the center, who do they follow?
The crowd.
The leader.
The edicts of the emperor.
Yeah, right? The edicts of the emperor, all the way back into Rome. When that rider showed up holding that golden letter carrier, he didn't have to say a word. He rode through the town holding that, and everybody knew we just got a word from on top. I think about life goal. What is a life goal for people who live here in the margins? What's the goal? What's driving the bus for them? Where do they want to get to? And I'm not talking about heaven. What's their goal?
Survival.
Survival is part. I mean, it's a very, very real part. And spiritually, what's their goal?
To follow Jesus.
Right? To follow. What's the Greek word for disciple? Mathetes. Interesting. It's the name of the gospel, Matthew. So that's interesting to me. What's the goal here for people who really live into the Roman Empire and such? What's their goal?
To make it big time.
To make it big time.
Climb the ladder.
Climb the ladder. I guess we don't really have anything in common with this situation. How does the gospel form community identity and lifestyle? By naming. It's a language. Somebody mentioned it earlier, right? We have code words that we use in church, right? What are some of them in your church? What's code words? That, you know, they're often so common, we can't think of them because they're so much a part of who we are. So where are you going on Sunday?
Yes.
I'm going to Mass. The Protestants say Mass?
Worship.
They say
Or
worship.
church.
Or church, right? Okay. And what are we going to do at Mass?
Listen and learn.
Listen and learn.
Have communion.
We're going to have Eucharist.
Sacraments.
We're going to have sacraments, right? What's in your church? 48
Icons.
icons.
Did you count them? They had 3 new ones.
What is wrong with you?
There's only 48.
And some of us have donated some, so I don't say anything against it.
Good Lord, I walked in here and I thought, man, this is a place that is screaming, we really are Catholic. I'm like, okay,
This is a
okay.
place running out of wall space. We don't have any
Yeah.
walls.
When I was here, we used
Bigger
to
church.
curb his budget, but it didn't work. So here's some of the words. Disciples, right? Blessed, that's a cool word. Makarios, we're going to get to that in chapter 5. Children, ecclesia, called out. Brothers and sisters, that's powerful language, right?
Familial relationship.
It is, yeah, because maybe your biological family has cut you off, right? So in 1971 to somewhere in there, and I'm back in Iowa, and Jim Cowger gets baptized in a pool in the high school, and his family at the same time has a little bitty casket, and there's a picture of him inside there, and they bury it in their backyard. These are Orthodox Jews, and he's dead to them because he became a Christian and was baptized, right? So in the first century, I'm not saying this was everywhere, but it wasn't uncommon either, right? So we know that when Paul is writing to the Romans, one of the things he says in there is that he wants to come and take up a collection for the people in Jerusalem because they've been fired from their jobs, they don't have any food, nobody's going to hire them, right? Their relatives don't talk to them. You hanging in there, Chris? Okay, and yeah, so brothers and sisters is a big thing. Prophets, all the way through the Acts of the Apostles, are a key player in the early Christian movement. And then they die out. And we need to talk about that because I think, like the Hebrew Bible, where you have the law and the writings and the prophets, we're missing something. It's dangerous to have prophets. It always, you read them, right? Some of these guys are whack jobs. But so wise, right? The wisdom writing says some people are wise, and then the little ones. The focus is on Jesus at the center. Why don't you stand up for a minute? Now you can rub one another's shoulders if you want to, but you don't have to.
Where are we going?
Where are we going?
Okay.
I'm gonna let you work this out.
Diane, you're getting left out here.
Potter Tammy.
Okay.
Mother Diane came.
Sure.
That's great.
Want to turn?
I always.
Okay, now you can turn.
Oh.
You
You gotta angle yourself so.
You know, I don't anymore because the medication that I take makes me just absolutely bruised, so I look like I've been beaten one.
Shoulder blades, right?
You're-
Yeah, that'll
you're
feel
fine.
good.
Good, good.
I want you to know this is
We're
on
for
camera,
fixers,
so
Amy.
we're not having any lawsuits. All right, I
Thank
need
you.
a
Oh,
volunteer.
good, thank you.
So who's volunteering tonight? Sharon?
Why me? What is this?
Look up chapter 9, verse 9. Mike, chapter 4, verses 19 to 22. And Doris, chapter 11, verse 29. And Paul,
Yep.
let's do chapter 10, verse 18, verse 22, verse 39, and who did I not get? Tammy in her new Bible wants chapter 24, verse 29, and Tony wants 19, verse 29. And I'm not sure I got everybody, but I didn't give it.
I don't think you did 10, 1 through 4, did you?
Okay, there you go. That's yours. All right. Follow me. Who has 4:19 to 22? Anybody?
I do.
All right.
He said to them, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." At once they left their nets and followed him. He walked along from there and saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. He called them, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. The word of the Lord.
This is a call story. That's what it is. Who has 9:9?
Me.
Okay.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. As he said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed him.
That happens every day, doesn't it? 10, 1 to 4.
That's me.
Okay.
He called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew the tax collector. James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him.
Who could just never lose that mistake, could he? Every time you read him. And here's Judas, the ugly sucker who turned him in, right? It's just horrible.
Make
Okay.
one little mistake. They never
Yeah.
forget.
Who's up next?
I think I am, but I can't remember what number it was supposed to be. 10, 19, 21?
No, just 19, 21. Chapter 19, verse 21.
Chapter 19, verse 21?
Well, I might have given you a different one and then changed it on you.
Probably did. 19:21, Jesus said to him, "You will be perfect, go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor. You will have treasure in heaven, come and follow me."
Cool, huh? Go do that.
No way. No way.
Doris, you have 11:29.
Right.
This is about the yoke, and we're not talking about eggs, right? We're talking about something else.
Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves.
Okay. Who has something from Disciples Act on his behalf? Who hasn't read yet that has to read yet? Tim? Okay.
So chapter
Whatever
five.
one I gave you is.
Oh, the one okay.
Mhm.
So the one you gave me was 24:29.
Okay.
Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken.
That just happened.
Mm.
It's over.
On Monday.
Who has not read, who has chapter and verse 2 read? Anybody? Tony? Anthony?
I have 1929. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life.
Okay. Jesus is the focus at the center of this community. Isn't that good news? You're all shaking your head. You know better than that. All right.
Did we ever hear that he called somebody who said no? Who didn't follow him? There was a
I
rich man
see.
on a cart somewhere. But
And somebody, remember when the rich man turned and walked away? That's one. I noticed that Lourdes is not here tonight, so that's 2.
He also healed about 5 lepers and 4 walked away, but what, 10 lepers and.
There was a bunch of lepers that were
Right.
healed, but only one came back.
yeah, but that wasn't, he wasn't calling them, he was healing them and then.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. In this community, how does the gospel form communal identity and lifestyle? Jesus claims, and this is important, exclusive revelation. So he is the revealer of God's presence, and there's just some of the text that you could check out. And don't forget, you have all these notes on your computer. And then the revealer of God's will, I just put down in groups of chapters, right? Because I think that the Beatitudes is a revelation of God's will, all three of those chapters. And so is chapter 10 and 13 and 18. The next one you know well. Rituals and associations form communal identity and lifestyle, right? So you know, how many of you are baptized? Right? It's pretty much, Chris, you baptized? Yeah, okay, and James and others. So, and then in our generation, if you stopped going to church for a while, you went back when
You had kids.
you had kids, because
They needed
they
Baptized.
gotta be baptized, and then the church creates this whole thing, oh, well, they keep you coming back, what's that, first communion, a little later, and then confirmation, and then
Your
there's
marriage.
penance in there someplace, and all this stuff, so, yeah. So, and then there's a certain prayer, right, and then Matthew has his version of what today we call the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, right, so that's there. Somebody look up chapter 7, verse 24 to 27. In the New Bible, yeah, they're going for it. She's like, I gotta stay awake in here somehow. Do it.
It was 7, 4. Okay. Oh, wait, on my page, sorry.
All right.
No, you're right now.
There.
Those new pages stick
They
together.
stick together, yeah.
So you just can't do anything.
24 to 27. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain comes down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash.
So let's all sing this song. Can we do that? Did we sing it in Sunday school?
Sunday school's been a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't go to Sunday school.
Then built your house upon the rock and the rains came down. Yeah.
We didn't sing
We
that
didn't
in
sing
my
that.
school.
We were far too
That's
busy.
Protestant.
It's a Lutheran thing,
Yeah.
Okay, forgiving others and loving are part of the associations that is highly upheld in this community. Ritual creates order and sustains an alternative form of life because the empire does not share these views. That's why this is a counter narrative, a counter-cultural story that with a great deal of risk is being lived out by a minority community in an incredibly large city. Warren Carter says that the giant synagogue was not very far away geographically from this little church. And that in some ways, this gospel is a debate with what's going on in this large synagogue. The only thing that I can imagine it to is St. Matthew's having the audacity to stand up against the Roman Church and say, but we are Catholic. Right?
The little church is good.
Very, very, yeah, it's the little church that could, right? So there's a lot of parallels here. Do you see that, or is this just me?
But they also, I think, because there were still so many Jews there, they came out of the rituals of their entire life out of the synagogue.
Yeah.
So they were a ritualistic people.
Yeah.
You gotta have some kind of replacement rituals, you can't just take it away from people and leave them ritualists.
Yeah, I don't think they did. Yeah, no, they were not without rituals. A lot of those rituals are still working. And if it's before Jamnia, they might still be going to the synagogue, some of them. Yes.
Before what?
There was a council in a coastal city. The coastal city's name was called Jamnia, and it was around 90 AD. And it was at that council at that coastal city that the Jews said, no more Christians in the synagogue. They're causing too many problems with this fake stuff about this, right? Because who was the revealer of God for the Jewish people? Moses, right? Who God gave him the Torah, right? We're going to see that replaced in chapter 5 for this small community. That's a big deal. That's a big deal to say, we know that for these thousands of years you've had the law, but Jesus is up there on a mountain, theological geography at work, maybe on a mountain, and he says, Moses said to you, but I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, whoa, there's a big shift going on here. It's never been a Catholic church before where it didn't start out by saying, we follow the Pope. I don't know what you all think you're up to. You've just broken with 2,000 years of tradition. I'm serious.
But we're called to fulfill the law and the prophets.
There's another little phrase in there, because I've been a Pauline person for a while. In that teachings of Matthew, do you notice this? Not one dot or tittle, not one iota of the law that has to be fulfilled. And I think that could be a little dig at the Apostle Paul, who vacillates on the role of the law in different letters. Okay. Any questions so far? Is this interesting to you? Yes.
Well, it just speaks to the Jewishness of this
Yeah.
community in its beginnings.
Very much so. Yeah, you won't lose sight of that in Matthew's gospel. You won't. You will.
What was the adjective?
Jewishness.
Oh,
The
Jewish.
Jewishness.
Yeah. There's a translation out. I'll send you the email. It's in English. It's done here by a rather conservative Christian university in California, where they don't make all the English translation. They keep a lot of the Jewish words in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And so Yahshua is what you see. You never see Jesus, and all these, the Torah is, and all that stuff goes through. So by the time you're done reading this, you're like, yeah, this is a very Jewish beginnings, which we should have that. Societal influences as points of contact, of conflict. Antioch is the second largest city in the empire at this time. The first center of conflict is the Roman Empire. The second center we've talked about is the whole synagogue. And so there's a strong disease, as Martin Heidegger would say, with the culture in which these Christians find themselves. Why the tensions? We've been through them, haven't we? Sisters and brothers, in my meetings with scores of millennials, whether it's one-on-one or small groups like this, the biggest criticism that I hear about the church today isn't what happens on Sunday morning. It has to do with what happens on Monday through Saturday.
You're a bunch of hypocrites. You say one thing on Sunday morning and you run your lives completely a different way. That's not
They just
authentic.
say to us, there's no authenticity. Where's the depth? Where's the difference? So once a week you volunteer at a food line, that's not quite, so they're like, so do we. I get points on my phone for doing it, but I do it, That's hard to hear. It's really hard to hear.
Is that Catholics in particular or organized religion in
It's
general?
organized Christianity in particular. And they don't draw a line between Protestants, and that's the other thing that I think really bothers them. You guys are all fighting with each other, you're all different, you can't even get along with each other. And you want me to be part of that?
Or you can't even decide what the truth is.
You can't even tell me. And you're down on gays, and you're down on women, and you're down on other religions, and yeah, they're just pretty much fed up. Not harping at you, but you're gonna be leaders, and so, from the margins, Christianity is not a numerical majority or close to it in this city or any place else in the empire. They are not made up of the ruling elite. They have no people on the city council. Society did not share their focus on following Jesus. And I just put that mildly. Let's say that Doris and Wendy and Tammy are upstanding church or city council people in Antioch, and Chris is too, and Mike and Sharon, Tony, Polly, Diane, Pablo, James are representatives of the Christian church. And you kind of stumbled across one another in a bar, and you're talking about Jesus. I didn't mean like stumble. I meant like you just came across one another's paths, Sharon. No, come on. So,
We didn't have breathalyzers back then.
well, and so what problem do you have with these people over here? What's the problem?
For one thing, they don't go by what Rome says.
Oh,
They're not part of the big group that we deal with all the time, which is that big synagogue over there. We know how to talk to those people. They
you're in the
talk back to us.
Christian church, you're not in the Roman group.
Darn.
So as the Roman people would say to you, shut up.
They're
We're
different.
from Rome.
They're different.
They're different, but you know, what you said was that these people don't follow the rules of Rome.
Well,
That's not a small thing.
No, it's a big thing.
That can cause chaos, and that can threaten the government. It's not good,
well, it sounds like they're a secret society too.
doesn't it?
Mhm.
Well,
You don't know what they're planning.
they're making the government sound like they're not in control. They're not doing their job.
You're not. You're the Christian.
They're cannibals.
They're cannibals.
Eat body.
They love their mothers.
Jesus. I've heard the stories.
But only on Sunday.
Drinking blood
You
too.
know, all night long. She could have kept what? You're subversive. You are subversives. You're a threat. You're not legal. You're not legal. Right?
We keep saying Jesus is Lord, and they know who really is the Lord.
Thank you.
Emperor is.
Yeah, we got some serious conflicts with you all.
Now, wasn't there a decree sometime among the Roman emperors that they were made to be like the Son of God or
Yeah.
gods?
Yeah.
And
I think probably promoted by their wives. Oh, sorry. But yeah, definitely divinity and emperorship. Some people took it more seriously than others. Some people took it very seriously. I mean, who do you want to have in the White House? God or some guy? Sorry.
That ship has sailed.
Getting back to the margins. There are literary factors too. The Gospel's main figure is constantly in conflict with the religious elite. You see it all the way through Matthew's Gospel. This religious elite will join force with the despised Roman Empire in order to put him to death. That is how badly he pushed both the power groups. They were bitter enemies with one another, and he was enough of a threat that they came together to kill him. That's something, isn't it? Jesus calls a small group of followers to follow him in this way of life, which is counter to both institutional forces, Rome and Judaism. There we go. So, is this making sense to you? I'm trying not to go through chapter and verse every step of the way. I'm trying to give you a good background, a lens to put on, so when you do read it, and it's 2 days from now, and you say to yourself, what did he say? It's on a PowerPoint thing on your computer, and you can go back and go, oh, yeah, what did that mean? And then you can call Tammy, and she'll go, I don't know, I was barely hanging on.
Is it too warm for you?
Yeah,
A little
it's
open?
really warm in here.
I think the air must have gone up. I don't know.
You can open it, because we're just about closing. We're gonna pick this up, and more than ever, we're gonna look at chapter 5. I've read start some of the places on the outline, which is later in the presentation that we're gonna look at tomorrow for part of the day. And, well, I'm not gonna tell you about the second half of the day, because I kind of want to do that as a little bit of a surprise with you. So,
Question?
yeah.
This church that you started as a religious margin became the center of everything, if you basically go through the Middle Ages and beyond. And now you're saying we're basically going back to big margins. Now, my question is not that history of it, but did it hurt the church for all those years when it was the center and controlled everything that it forgot? It was a marginal church.
Finally, I can answer that for you.
Oh, great, he's got an answer.
Are you ready? Mother Mandy is teaching the church history class. And she'll let you know the answer to your question.
Touche.
All right.
In that one.
I could give you my opinion, but that's all over. The statistics tell us that we're headed back to the margins. I don't have to say that. Ever since 1950s, there's been a very gradual decline in the 50s and the early 60s. And the Cultural Revolution, the sexual, drug, rock and roll revolution of the 60s gave a spike to a drop in church attendance. It didn't quite recover in the 70s and continued to decline gradually in the 80s. But in the 90s, in Western Europe, it really declined and crossed the Atlantic and began to happen here to now the 21st century. The last 5 years, the number of church closings has set a record for every year for the last 5 years. So it's not just a Protestant thing, it's not just a Catholic thing, it's an organized, institutionalized Christian thing. And it may spell good news for all of us and the generations to come. Right? We are a church of death and resurrection, not just once. When you study church history, you'll see it again and again and again. Nobody likes the death part. The church attendance on Good Friday doesn't quite match Easter. Let's join hands. By the way, there's an order in the Roman Church called the Franciscans who live on the margins of Roman Catholicism ever since their beginning. And they do that intentionally. So we will pray the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples and has made it all the way down in various forms to us today. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
my sisters and brothers, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of the margins. follow well, go in peace, and serve the Lord as you love, forgive, and serve one another.
Amen.